Good morning from the kitchen, folks. Today I'm going to be making a Pilsner with hops and honey from grain. My key ingredient in this brew is this Bohemian Pilsner malt, and I need to put a kilo of this into my pan. Smells nice and malty, so I'm just going to pour some into my pan. I'll weigh what's left. Yep, so I've got a kilo of malt grain now in my pan. So I'm now going to fill my pan up with spring water. And I'm just using spring water because the tap water in Leeds is a bit chlorine-y and it's tainted my brews in the past. So this is what I've got. Nice cold malty wort. And what I'm just going to do is stir it all around so there's nothing stuck to the bottom of the pan, and that it's all mixing together nicely. So then it's gas on, and I'm just going to put this on low because I don't want it to burn underneath. What I want to do with this is let it warm gradually. So this literally is now just a case of playing the waiting game. So it's been over an hour, and I'm now reaching a point where it's not far from getting to a simmer. It's on a very low heat, and I'll leave the spoon on top because when it does begin to boil, that should prevent it from boiling over, or so my mum told me. And just to point out, like the point, that I'm boiling without a lid on purposefully because it releases the sulphide smells which are contained within the malt if you do that, and then you don't get cabbagey, farty tasting beer. Nobody really wants that. So another hour passed, going really nice and slowly with it. There's no rush. The key to making beer with grain on a hob this way is not to rush it. Let all those sugars and all those flavours come out of the grains. Well, an hour and a half has now passed, and probably a little bit more. And what I want to do now is turn the heat off. And you can see that that's been bubbling nicely. And I'm just going to leave this now. So I'm going to remove the spoon, pop on this to keep any contaminants out. It will still let the steam escape. And I'm just going to leave this now for 2 hours to steep, like you would with tea bags in tea. I just want it to steep, I want it to sit there, I want all the goodness to come out of those grains, and then I'm going to come back for the second boil. So here's my soup 2 hours later. I've topped it up with a little bit more spring water as the evaporation caused it to drop down. And what I want to do now is turn the heat back on. And I want to bring this now back up to a more rapid boil. So I want this to be a nice and potent, hoppy and refreshing Pilsner. So to that end I'm going to be using Cascade hops. So these are Cascade hop pellets, as you can see. And these come from Huggy's Brew Store. I believe I bought these through Amazon. Smell delicious. And I'm going to put... So I've gone for a very hoppy 30 grams. I've actually got 31, but we won't worry about that. Well, I think it's safe to say that this is now boiling, and look, the spoon has worked. So let's lower that heat. In go the hop pellets. They will disintegrate straight away, and I can already smell the hoppy aroma that they're giving off. I'm now going to leave these to simmer like they are for another 30 minutes before removing the heat completely. Okay, so the wort is completed. I let it boil with the hops for 30 minutes, and I've let it stand for an hour, and it's all nice and mixed and steeped. So now it's time to transfer into the demijohn. So I'm using a sieve to filter, and I'm just going to begin by pouring. I can really smell the hops. So using the back of a plastic spoon, I'm going to press the grain into the sieve to squeeze as much of the water out as possible. This is where all the flavours are going to be, and the sugars, all the good stuff that makes the beer. There are two unfortunate sides to brewing from grain. The first one is that you end up with as much grain as what you started. In fact, more, because it expands a bit with the water. And that's just a waste product. You can cook with it, and I have done, but when you put hops in it, inedible. So that's going to become garden fertiliser. So I guess it's being used for something. The other thing is that it's only a demijohn, there's not a lot of room in it, and therefore I'm going to end up with quite a lot of sediment, and probably, if I'm lucky, I'll get 5 bottles, but sometimes I only manage to get 4 bottles out of them. So the grain that's left in the sieve, I'm just going to put onto a baking sheet, and I'll keep adding to that until it's all done. That's a kilo of wet grain. So there's my demijohn, and I now need to make use of this space just here. And I'm going to do that by adding some spring water into a saucepan, putting that on to boil. As the water heats up, I'm going to drizzle into it a jar of honey. This is a 454 gram jar. And I just want to stir this now. I want all of the honey to dissolve. I don't want any stuck to the bottom of the pan. Okay, this has been on a while. It hasn't boiled yet, but the honey has now completely dissolved, so I'm going to turn the heat off. And then once again, with my demijohn in the sink and the funnel, I'm just going to pour the liquid now in there. Now you'll notice that this is full, and it's overly full, but that's been done on purpose because I need to pour some out to take the gravity. But it's too warm yet to take the gravity, and it's also too warm to add the yeast, so I now need to leave this for a couple of hours to cool down. So we need to talk about yeast, and I'm using this bad boy. So this is Funky Pineapple Yeast Pitch from WHC Labs. I got this from Malt Miller, and this is enough to do 5 gallons. So I'm just going to empty this into this jar just here, and I'm going to use about 1/5 of it in there once this has cooled down a bit more. So this is the yeast now inside a jar I'm just reusing. I'm shaking it up because the yeast itself, it sinks to the bottom, and it's kind of like in a liquid. So there's about 1/5 of the yeast. The rest of it's going to go in the fridge. So I'm going to add to my yeast a little bit of spring water. I'm going to supplement the yeast with a little bit of this Lalvin champagne sparkling wine and cider yeast. This normally gives a drier finish than ale yeast would. I don't want to put too much in, but the good thing about this yeast is it activates really quickly. So I'm just going to put 1/2 teaspoon and add it into that one, so there's 2 yeasts combined. Now what will happen is the Lalvin yeast will activate first, and that will get it going. The ale yeast takes a bit longer to kick in, so it will have hopefully a prolonged fermentation with both yeasts working. I'm just giving this a little bit of a mix around. It smells very hoppy. What I want to do now is pour some of this wort out into my gravity tube. That will not be going back in here, just in case there's any cross-contamination. Now I need to take the original gravity and the final gravity in order to calculate the alcohol percentage. I can't take the original gravity just yet because it'll be too warm. I'm just going to see how warm it is at the minute. So this liquid is currently 42.5 degrees centigrade. This needs to go down to 20 before I can take the gravity. Okay, the water's cooled down now to a good temperature for adding the yeast to it, but because of the separation, I'm concerned that the yeast isn't going to mix properly. So this is a clean plastic vessel, which is what the water was in, which went into this. So it's very clean. I know it's not had any impurities in. So I'm just going to pour the wort back into it. So now that's all mixed together, I'm going to take the yeast, I'm just going to give it a little stir because that had begun to settle in the bottom. And I'm now going to add the yeast. So that's gone straight in there. That's going to start to activate fairly quickly. The Lalvin yeast doesn't take long at all. The beer yeast will take longer. So I'm now going to pour back into the demijohn, and we can consider this aerated now. It smells fantastic. You can really smell the malts and the hops. Now this is a full demijohn, and when the fermentation begins it will build a foamy head on top called a krausen. And the krausen is going to squirt up and come out through the airlock and make a big mess. So for the first couple of days I'm not going to use an airlock. I'm going to use a blow-off pipe. So I shall put that in there, and then if the krausen does rise through it, it will come through the tube, and that is going to go into this vessel which will be filled with water. So it works in the same way as an airlock, but this is not an airlock. So the kitchen that I'm in is a small room and it gets really warm with the central heating. So I'm going to leave the demijohn in here tonight because I want the fermentation to begin. So I'm going to pop the blow-off pipe in. That sits snugly. The other end goes in here under the water level, and when fermentation happens CO2 is produced. The CO2 will come up the pipe and the popping that you would normally see in an airlock will come through the water in here. And if the krausen does flourish and comes out, then nothing's going to be spoiled, and this tube is easier to clean out than an airlock. So now all that remains is to take the original gravity and I'm starting with an original gravity of 1.070, 1070. So I've got my demijohn labelled, blow-off pipe in, so now it's just a case of playing the waiting game. So I'll be back tomorrow for a progress update before putting this away until the fermentation is over. Cheers folks. Quick update from the next morning. And you can clearly see that the krausen has grown there. There's some furious fermentation activity taking place. Looking really good. And look at the bubbles in the blow-off pipe. What a constant stream. So there's tons of CO2 being given off. So happy days. I'll be back in a couple of weeks when things begin to slow down. So see you later folks. Morning from the kitchen folks, it's my Pilsner clearing day. So let's have a look at it. So this has actually been in the demijohn longer than I've ever had a grain beer in the demijohn. It's been in a month and it's actually looking decent. It's fairly opaque, good layer of sediment in the bottom. I'm going to actually keep some of this and recycle the yeast from this one. There's no airlock activity. It was fast, it got slower and slower and slower, and then really for the last 2 weeks it's barely done anything, but I've just kept it in there as there was a very little bit of movement. But now there's not, so bung out, siphoning tube in. I'm holding the tube in place with a tube clip. I seem to have lost the bottom, but I think it might just be in the top bit of the sediment. It doesn't matter if I get a little bit through at this point. So now the fun bit. Yeah, I've definitely got some sediment through. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to have a little sample. Just curious, really. Smells nice, really beery. Really nice. It tastes a bit like a Belgian ale, more than a Pilsner. The honey sweetness is there, but it's subtle. But it's nice, I like it. I'm using Clear It Wine Findings by Young's. This is a two-step process. You add some of bottle A and then some of bottle B. So here goes a bit of bottle A. Equivalent of about a teaspoon. There's a bit of yeast in the siphoning tube now. And there's going to be some bubbles very shortly. Okay, let's call it a day at that. I don't want to get any more sediment in. I'm going to back pour this. So I'd gone right down into the sediment. I couldn't see it where it was going. So here's my beer. I'm just going to put the lid on and give it a little mix around so the findings mixes with it. Okay, lid's on loosely now. I'm going to leave this for an hour, and then after an hour I add findings B. Okay, so I'll see you in an hour. So here's the yeast in the bottom of the demijohn. I'm going to harvest that and put it into this container. I'm just going to add a bit of spring water into the demijohn just to loosen up what's left. Give it a really good swill around, and then I pour it in. That'll do. Then I simply pop the lid on, and I'm going to put this in the fridge for now and come back to that later. Okay, an hour has passed, so I'm now going to pour the beer back into the demijohn via a funnel. No need to siphon it this time. There is a bit of sediment in the bottom of this already. I'm going to try and avoid it if I can, and if I can't, it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to add findings B now. So same amount as findings A, just a splash, teaspoon equivalent. And then the rest of the beer on top, and this will mix it nicely. In fact, I'm just going to pour it all in, sediment and all. I think it's quite reactive to the findings, if I remember rightly, so hopefully it will just claw it all down to the bottom. So there we have it, here's my beer. The findings should drag all that cloudiness to the bottom, and I should be left with a line of sediment and some hopefully clear beer, but we won't know for a few days' time, so I'll see you then. Good morning from the kitchen, folks. It's beer bottling day. So it's been 2 weeks since I attempted to clear it. There is a little bit of opaqueness to it, but it's definitely not clear. I'm just going to have to accept that this is going to be one of those beers that's not a clear beer, and in fact it may still clear in the bottle, but I'll just go as is. In terms of a name for this beer, I still don't know what to call it. I can't keep calling it a hoppy and honey Pilsner because it clearly isn't a Pilsner, and there is hops in it and there is honey in it. So I think I'm going to have another taste today and decide what I'm going to call this one. I'm bottling today into standard 500ml beer bottles. These are all actually Erdinger bottles, and a 250ml bottle. So I'm doing that based on what I can see in the demijohn, knowing that that would be 5 750ml bottles. So this is the equivalent in beer bottles. I've never used beer bottles before, and I'm capping them today. And again, I've never done that before either, so it's a learning curve for me. Now, in terms of carbonation and secondary fermentation, each one of these 500ml bottles needs 2 carbonation drops because it's 1 per 250ml, and the small bottle, the 250ml, gets just 1 drop. When it's bung out, siphoning tube in. I'm holding the tube in place with a tube clip, and I've got the bottom right in the sediment because the first lot that comes out is going to go into my hydrometer flask just there. So here we go. Smells really beery, and I like that. It's a good sign. Really good smell. High hopes for this one. And there we go. The bubbles in the siphoning tube show that that process is now over. So here's what I finished with. I guess that just right. I'm bottling today with a bottle capper. I've never used one of these before. I wouldn't have even ordered one. I like the champagne bottles that I normally use, but I ordered a flat bottom Firmzilla and it came with a load of extra kit, including this. So I thought, let's expand my repertoire of bottles. So it's got a magnetic bit on there, it holds the cap in place. And as far as I'm aware, you just hold it over the bottle. I looked at one short tutorial on YouTube. Hopefully I won't mess this up. And just firmly give it a push down. Ooh! Well, it's done. It's not leaking. That must be it. Slightly unnerving. That was a lot nicer. Yeah. And here they are. I must admit, I wouldn't want to have to do 500 of those, but it got easier as I went along. Now I'm just going to give my bottles a wash to wash any sticky beer residue off them prior to labelling. While my bottle's dry, it's time to take the final gravity of my beer. And I'm always pleased when it sinks like that, the hydrometer. That means that the sugars have just about been used up. And I'm finishing off on a final gravity of 1.006. 1.006. I want to decide what I'm going to call this, but I need to have another taste first before I do decide. It smells really, really good. I'm really pleased with how it smells. Looks, I would have preferred it to be a bit more clear, but you know, never mind. But let's see how it tastes. It's dry, extremely beery. There's definitely a Pilsner quality to the flavour. It's not a Pilsner. It's not being cleared and lagered in that way that Pilsners are. But it's got that quality to it. I'm trying to think what I can call this one. Not a Pilsner. It has got a sweet edge. It was Bohemian Pilsner malt. I used funky pineapple ale yeast. So I could call this my funky Bohemian ale or my funky Bohemian strong ale. I guess I need to find out what the final alcohol percentage is first, so let's do that. I started off with an original gravity of 1.070. I deduct from that the final gravity of 1.006, which gives me a figure of 0.064. And then I multiply that by 131.25, and that equals 8.4%. I think that's pretty good, and that counts to me as a strong ale. So let's call this my funky Bohemian strong ale. So I just need to print out my labels. And now I just need to label my bottles. And there they all are done. I've now got the ale on my conditioning shelves. As you can see, the bottles are there next to my other bottles which are conditioning. These are temperature controlled shelves. I've got a thermostat there on the bottom shelf, which is the coolest shelf. It goes to that plug. If the temperature drops below 19.5, it turns the heater on. A slim radiator that you can see at the back down there. And that stays on until the temperature gets to 20.5 and then it switches off. And that keeps these shelves at a very nice temperature for conditioning my beers, wines and ciders. These will need to condition for a month, so I'll be back in a month's time to open them. So see you then, folks. Good evening from the kitchen, folks. It's the grand opening night for my funky Bohemian strong ale. I really want this to be a good one. I'm quite nervous about it. I don't know which way it's going to go. I really would like a good flavour, a good smell, some clarity, but above all I'd like it to have a bit of a head and a bit of fizz. Well, not fizz, but sparkle. I want some liveliness to it. At the same time, I don't want it to explode when I open it. I never know what I'm going to get with beer. Let's see what happens. So I thought I'd match up today, cuffs and collars and all that. I've got my Castmark t-shirt on and my Castmark bottle opener. I've got about 900 and something scans on the ale trail, nearly on my 1,000. Right, here goes. Oh, that was a nice noise, wasn't it? You want that. Okay, I'm not seeing much in the way of life looking at the drink, but I'll tell you something. Straight away, that smell, it's absolutely beautiful. It reminds me, the maltiness that's in that smell, it reminds me of the smell of Holston Pills, actually. Let's see how it pours. I've got my trusted Horsforth Beer Festival glass 2012. Okay, not terrible. Actually, not bad either. That's pretty good. I think we can say, winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's not bad, is it? It's got a head. It's got life in it. All right, it's a cloudy beer. That doesn't matter. We all drink cloudy beers these days. But it's got a head. It pours like a beer. It looks like a beer. It smells like a beer. And it tastes like a bloody good beer. I'm really happy with this one. I think we can safely say, turned out nice again. Cheers, folks. I'm going to enjoy this. Enjoy your weekends, your weeks, whatever day you're watching it. Down the hatch. Or as the funky Bohemians would say, Prost, if you're on the German side of the border. The film that you've just watched is a Moss Home and Garden production. You can find more by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. I'd just like to say thank you very much for supporting my YouTube channel and for watching my films. It really is very much appreciated. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel in order to receive future updates about the home and garden films which I upload. You can find my YouTube channel by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. Please click on the red subscribe button. When you've done that, a little bell will appear. If you press that also, then you'll get future updates about the films which I upload. If you like my films, if you like my style of filming, then you might also like my travel channel, which you will find by going to youtube.com/Stuart Moss or type in www.mosstravel.tv. Again, if you could subscribe to that channel, it would be hugely appreciated. If you'd like to get Moss Home and Garden updates on Facebook, then please open Facebook and do a search for Moss Home and Garden, and you will find the page. If you like the page, then you will get future updates on there. And if you'd like to connect on Instagram for home, garden and travel photography, as well as some stories, then my username is StuMoss, STUMOSS. If you'd like to connect on Twitter, then my username is @StuartMoss. And if you'd like to contact me about film usage or any other issue, please just email me on stewmosshomegarden@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much for supporting my channel, for watching my films. I do appreciate it. I'd just like you all to have a great day.